Hey Bourbon Women, my name is Monica Wolf.
And I'm Ashley Barnes.
And we are the co-founders of the Spirits Group. And we're coming to you all live from my living room and our office. And we wish we could be with you in person this year, but unfortunately, we're going to do this from the comfort of our home. We hope that you all can tune in and that you enjoy some of the information that we're sharing with you today. We're going to talk about faults in whiskey with our in-house expert, Ashley Barnes. And let's get started.
So, Monica, how did you get started in evaluating whiskey? What was your first introduction?
So a few years ago, I started volunteering in the back room of craft distilling judging. And it was something that I became so passionate about. Originally, I just was curious what the process was. So again, I started volunteering, organizing all of the flights that were going to go out to the judges. I didn't realize at the time what an education it was going to be, but we would get in hundreds of boxes of bottles, and I did the whiskey table, so we would just have like a huge table lined up of whiskey, and I would go through, read the labels, organize them into flights by category, by proof, by flavor profile. And we had distillate, which is unaged whiskey, as well as aged. And it was really over the course of those judgings, I did 2 a year, that I really got competent in understanding profiles, faults, and really the ins and outs of whiskey. So actually, oddly enough, through that, I got to know a lot of the judges, I got to read a lot of the judging notes, and when I met you, I was in the lab at the distillery you were working at on a tour, and I saw you giving your presentation with all your, just hundreds of glasses lined up.
Inventory day.
Yeah. And I just thought she would be an amazing asset to the judging team. So I didn't ask you that day because I'm like,
no.
There's no way, she's too busy, she wouldn't want to. But I put your name in the hat as a judge that I thought would be an amazing addition. And
la-ti-da, we're here.
And so then, that weekend, you ended up being available. I befriended you.
You did.
And that's kind of how we met and connected. And here we are. So
yeah.
It was a few months later, Ashley gave me a call. She said that she was interested in craft, especially after having experienced the judging. She knew that I worked as a consultant in the craft distilling world, had some questions for me, and then slowly we just started realizing, her skill set complements mine. I'm more focused on the business and strategy aspect of the industry. She's incredibly technical. Both those skills are needed. Mm-hmm. We just thought, let's do this. So we co-founded the Spirits Group. And so today we just want to share some of the basics around evaluating a whiskey. Ashley's going to get into some of the faults that come up that you all can identify when you're nosing, sipping whiskey. Ideally and hopefully if the bottle is on the shelf, you're probably not going to come across these, but when you're taking tours, when you're at distilleries, there are smells, there are tastings, you might taste product that's not quite ready yet. You'll be able to really identify and start to understand some of the flavors and the nuances of whiskey. And we just hope that we can share a little bit of what we do day in and day out with you all. So the first thing, I guess just to explain what we're going to cover, Ashley's going to explain how to evaluate. So starting from
the first thing I do. So every day I look at samples. I might be looking at distillate and I might be looking at Matrit, which is an aged spirit. But we're just going to focus on the whiskey or a bourbon for this case. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at it. Obviously, we look at food first before we try it. So we're going to look at our whiskey. We're going to hold it up. and look to see if it's clear, if it's a deep amber, if it's a light amber, maybe it's a corn color, and kind of take note of that. The lighter the color, it could be a lower proof. It could be more corn based and a younger whiskey. It could have a little cloudiness to it, which maybe filtration didn't get all those fatty acids out. You know, there's lots of things that could be going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it. I'll be like, make a couple notes. You know, it's very appealing. What's in our glass is obviously, it's got a nice clear color to it. It's a very rich amber, and it looks lovely. I'll even swirl it a little bit, and you can see, I don't know if you guys can see it at home, but sometimes when you swirl your whiskey, you start to see the legs. We always talk about them legs. You know, we've got nice legs coming down. Those are our fusel oils, showing us exercising, showing how lovely they are.
And if you think about it too, a lot of times barrel proof really has that viscous, kind of oily, the legs are longer and they kind of stick to the glass more. If you have a lower proof, it just, because it has the water added to it.
So barrel strength, that's a really good point. Barrel strength hasn't gone through the filtration that a lower proof product would have. So if you're going to add water to it, then you're going to have some fatty acids that will come out of solution. Can't talk, we've been sipping too much. But so as you add water, think you've cooked some bacon. Put a little bit of water in that pan. Well, now that clear grease, the clear fat, has come out of that state, and it's more visual. You can see it as it's cooling and becoming larger molecules. Same thing in whiskey. You add the water, molecules that once were alcohol soluble and smaller are now larger and not as soluble in your alcohol. So they're going to come out of solution, and you might see them as foggy or as little floaties going around. And so with the barrel strength, you're not going to see that as much. But what you will see, because it hasn't been filtered as much, are the legs and those oils.
And one thing that I saw, not all the time, but I did occasionally come across it in the back room of the judgings, and then of course, you know, you would come across it as a judge. When it's cloudy, sometimes it can be because of improper proofing, like they add the water too fast and it ends up looking cloudy. So there is like a very exacting process, right? When you're adding the water to the whiskey, it has to have a chance to, the molecules have to melt together. Yeah. So Ashley's a chemistry background, I'm a business background. I get it, I get the concepts, but Ashley explains why. So that's
I do.
So
we're learning.
Yeah.
I'm definitely learning this business side of things and how to make things profitable instead of I just want it to taste good. I don't care what it costs. She's making sure that things actually
it's
are
a
profitable.
holistic view. So anyway, so that's the visual.
Right.
Then what's next?
So I know we all want to get to tasting, but we're going to smell it first. So some of you guys might remember from high school science class about the waft. You can waft it. You can, if you have some nice Glencairns, and start to smell. And this is where everybody's different. So I've heard people say you can only smell whiskey if you open your mouth. I can't smell anything if I open my mouth, so that can't be true 100% of the time. But what is true is to try different methods. Waft it. Smell it from afar, smell it down in there. Now, if you're looking at a barrel strength product and you stick your nose down in there, there's a lot of ethanol. So you want to be careful and mindful of that, because we want to get more than the ethanol flavors. We want to smell it. Okay.
And so I personally, and again, Ashley has her ways and I have mine, and it's such a personal preference, and everyone's nose and is different, palate is different. So I actually do open my mouth when I smell, and I also smell each nostril, out of each nostril.
Right. Sometimes one side's a little stopped up, so you want to get that full range.
And some people have a dominant nostril, so some can just smell better out of one. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
And when I open my mouth, I find that I can actually get the flavors of the whiskey. Mm-hmm. You can almost taste it on your tongue. And so that's just my preference. So
absolutely, everybody's Everybody's different. I feel like I'm a little bit of an anomaly that I don't have that experience just from talking to people. But I want to stress that it's okay if you're different. If what works for you works for you. So you want to smell it. Is there anything that stands out? Is it kind of grassy? Does it smell like someone just cut their grass? Is it kind of hay-like a fresh bale of hay? Does it smell like your grandma's basement? You know, those are things you want to notate on the nose. And we always want to smell it first. Now, we're evaluating. So we aren't always sitting out on the back porch and enjoying it.
Apart.
The goal is to not pick it apart when we're sitting on the back porch enjoying a whiskey. But we're evaluating it, which is what we're doing. So keep that in mind. So we're going to look for things. Is this a little corny? Does it smell like a little young? So when I'm talking about a young whiskey, it's going to be a more fresh, a corn forward, if you will. Like mama just cut that corn off the cob from the garden. Or if it's a rye, just like a fresh rye bread.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, like when we're smelling distillate versus aged, the distillate, because it really is the distilled majority corn, it smells like cornbread. I mean, it literally, and hopefully, if it's a good quality distillate, you do kind of want to smell, want to smell the grain, and you don't want to smell some of the things that sometimes we smell if there are flaws in it, which we're going to talk about here in a minute.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. But the good distillate does, and we've talked about this, it never at any point from the new make through 6 month, 1 year, 2 year, it should never be offensive or really off-putting.
Exactly.
So it smells different over the years, but it should never be gross.
It shouldn't gross, yes. It should never be offensive. You should never go, oh no, I can't sip on that because it's 6 months old. I can't handle that because it's new make. At no point should it be that way. But our hope is through this and hopefully some other videos you guys will get to watch is that you'll say, hey, I can see the potential here.
Yep.
So we've now smelled it. Let's taste. So when you taste for evaluation, you want to take just a little bit, just enough to coat your tongue, go off the back, get the flavor, but not so much that you're going to kill your palate. And just a little sip. Get it on your lips. That's it. So, you want it's evaporated. That little sip never even made it past the back. I get the finish, but it never even really went down my throat. With that, what the alcohol is going to do is it's going to evaporate. It's going to leave you those fatty acids. It's going to leave you the organics within the whiskey. And it's going to really allow you to taste it. Now, you're going to get your top notes kind of first. So that's going to be a lot of your florals, a lot of your light flavors, a lot of light like citrus notes. You're going to come back on your finish, and it's going to linger a little bit. Some people like more of a linger. Some people are going to like a little bit of a short not really a linger.
And I love a long finish. And here in Kentucky, it's called the Kentucky Hug, where it kind of gives you that warmth in your soul.
It's like grandma's hug in a glass.
So I love a long finish. But yeah, that's when you can really evaluate, like just with a little bit that kind of goes, it's like, is it here or did it disappear? Mm-hmm. Also another thing is, did it hit all the areas of my tongue? Because actually something, the other day, I was tasting a distillate and it smelled great. It tasted good on the tip of my tongue. But what I realized was when I swallowed it, it kind of skipped the whole second half of my tongue, kind of like the flavor just disappeared and there was no finish. So it's like, for me, I'm like, okay, I identified there's probably something missing here. It's not fully structured. And that's when I call Ashley. Because I'm like, okay, I've identified it, but now what do we do about it? And how is that going to age? Like if it goes in the barrel and it was kind of missing something, what's going to happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years? Does the barrel and does the aging process fill in those gaps? Does it end up thin?
So that's a great point. And that's why we're walking through the different steps. So on the finish, hey, I've got a long finish and it's on the tip of my tongue, but there's not a whole lot going on the back. It just dissipates. So that could be from a couple different areas. It could be, maybe those heads from the distillation were cut a little off, or
like
maybe
too soon?
Okay. Or maybe the tails, there weren't enough tails in there. It also could be linked back to fermentation. Maybe those sugars didn't get completely converted, so those organics and those molecules are not there for you to interpret over.
Yeah.
And sometimes that will help in aging. Things like that will age out. So one of the things that we like to do is when we're looking at distillate, when I'm sitting down with the client or with Monica or as a judge, I will make those notes. Okay, this is it's very clean, it's very complete, it's very balanced. But you're missing on the finish. Could be from fermentation, could be from cuts. Maybe let's evaluate it with a little bit of water. Let's cut it down a little bit, see if things open up so the molecules are there. They're just covered up by that higher ethanol content.
Yeah. And not to interrupt, but like one of the things that Ashley had at her former jobs, and when we started our company, we ordered a bunch of these glasses, is she has glasses actually with longer stems. When she's going through hundreds of samples, it's easier for her to kind of manipulate the glassware. And they each have a line, one at the bottom and then a second one at the top. And the first line, it allows her to not have to measure everything. It's just she can visualize it. She pours the whiskey in or the distillate, and then she fills the rest up with water, and that cuts it perfectly. And like she said, when the water is added, it allows for the actual analysis to occur. Like you would never want to add that much water if you were just on the back patio. But this is like...
It eliminates the ethanol aspect. So if you think about it, if it's very high proof, that dominates a lot.
Yeah.
So by cutting it down to about 10 proof or 20%, approximately where we cut to. So 40 proof.
40 proof, yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the other things too, just while we're on the topic of, she's kind of going through what could some of the issues be. And by process of elimination, and we do this with our clients, like they'll send a distillate or we'll go on site, visit. Usually, hopefully it's a production day so she can kind of watch the whole process. And then once we taste the distillate off the still, she's going to give suggestions. Like it could be this, and then they tweak that. If it's still there, okay, that's not it. So it's like, it's the whole scientific method, honestly, in action. I remember that from science class. And it's fascinating because it really is. Kind of an iterative, some things are just so clear, and we're about to get into that here in a minute. Like there are certain flaws that are created by, okay, this was a bacterial contamination. We've had a few of those. This is a fermentation issue. Know immediately what to do to tweak that. Sometimes you have to actually go through a couple of different...
Yeah, it could be one or the other or both. So as I'm tasting or as we were taste with clients, that's part of a conversation that's being had.
Yeah.
But for now, we're tasting whiskey, and we're gonna get into a few of the common things. So let's talk about heads. I mentioned heads earlier. When distillation is occurring, the first product that comes over off the still are what we would call heads. So you have heads, hearts, and tails. Heads are the first, hearts are the meat in the middle, and tails are the very end. So your heads, they're not very pleasant. It's kind of like cheap nail polish. I think everybody knows what cheap nail polish would be. Acetone, sometimes it's kind of fruity because it's high in aldehydes. It's very estery, just solventy.
Like sickly sweet.
Sickly sweet, very sweet. And that's those esters coming over. So you want to cut out the heads. It's also got high methanol content, and we don't want that in our whiskey.
Not good.
So if you crack a cork, pull it open, and as we discussed, we've looked at the color, but then you start to take a nose, and you immediately get acetone. It's really sweet, cheap nail polish remover. I would not sip. It is way too headsy, and you probably don't want to sip too much of that. So moving on to the hearts. The hearts are they're the part that we want to keep. That's what's going to
go in the barrel.
Right. So that's going to be all the good stuff. And then it kind of tails off at the end for the tails. Now for the tails, that's where you're going to get a little bit of that oily flavor, a little bit of cardboard character, a little wetness, kind of like
sometimes
smell
fishy.
Wet. Could be a little fishy.
Or like, is it like wet dog?
No, not really wet dog. That's a fault. That's a fault. We don't want wet dog. But a little wet, like a damp something, like a damp cardboard. But here's the thing. We want a little bit of those tails because those tails then mature into rich dried fruits. So you want a little bit of those, but you don't want too many because then they have what's called the tail burn. And as you get deeper, it's a burn that comes off in the tails and it burns the back of your tongue and it does not age out. It will not go away. Even if that liquid has been in the barrel for 10 years, you're still going to have that burn. So there is a very fine line to cut there because you want some of those flavors, but you don't want too many of them. And one of the things that we see a lot in craft, as distillers are learning where to make their cuts, they might cut too soon because they don't want to risk taking too many tails. Or maybe they don't want to risk getting any heads. Mm-hmm. So they cut really conservative, super tight. So they're losing their volume in production, unfortunately, which is bad for them, and they're only getting that really pure heart. So then as that distillate is aging, it's not developing complex flavors. So there's a very delicate dance, and we've got some really cool, really good distillers out there that are learning and really making some great things. But one of the things is cuts.
Yeah, and something that Ash will say is either after tasting the aged spirit or from tasting the distillate, she'll be like, it does need to be a little dirty.
It does a little dirty, not offensive.
If it's super clean, she'll be like, this is going to be thin, not as complex in the finished whiskey. If it's Matra that she's tasting, well, okay, but the distillate that you're currently producing, let's start making that the way it should be so that this problem does get fixed. Right. So she's always like, it needs to be a little dirty. You don't, and that's like you don't have to be like just so, kind of like this video. Like it's not perfect, but it's
got a little grit to it.
Yeah, a little grit, and it really does. I mean, it's amazing because we've seen like clients over the years that they've taken her advice, and now we're starting to be able to taste. Okay, it's been in the barrel for 6 months. For a year, for 2, and we can compare it to the aged stuff that they had before, and you can see how it really does affect it.
Yeah.
So making cuts, is that, I know every part of it is so important, but I think that really is like,
that is step one, and one of the most, probably the easiest I can't talk today. One of the easiest things for a consumer, for our bourbon women here to notice. Pop a cork or get a glass at a bar and go, man, that smells like my cheap nail polish. It's one of the most noticeable things.
Yep.
So let's get into a few more faults.
Yeah. So those are heads and tails. Hearts are the good stuff, the meat and potatoes, but you want to make sure there's little heads and tails on the other side. Mm-hmm. Faults, though, are what happens aside from the cuts.
Aside from the cuts. So these are things that could happen through fermentation. They can happen during bottling. Put a cork on there that's got a little taint to it. Well, now you've just tainted your whiskey. The whiskey wasn't tainted before, but thanks to that cork, we've now contaminated it, and it's really musty and moldy. It's TCA, common in wine, but it is also in whiskey. One of the reasons it's not as common in whiskey is because wine you can store on its side. Whiskey,
like the bottles,
the bottle you store on its side. And whiskey, you do not want to do that. So because of that, it's not as common in whiskey, and especially with synthetic corks now. But it is there, and that's kind of a musty, moldy.
Yeah.
Another one that's really, I hear it a lot. I hear it a lot in young whiskey, in young distilleries that are just cranking stuff out, would be earthy. And this kind of traces back, if you think about going out to the garden, beets. Beets have a very earthy smell to them and very earthy taste. And so does when it rains, or in Kentucky, we like to say, I can smell that rain coming. It's geosmin. And geosmin is really a cool little critter here, is because in large quantities, in a large concentration, and by large, we're talking like parts per million, so not really large, but it comes off very dank, musty, moldy. Grandma's basement that she hadn't been down in 50 years. But
not ideal.
Not ideal. Not ideal. And that typically comes from contamination, but geosmin is found in the soil. So that's how it is transferred into the air when it's getting ready to rain. So when we smell the rain coming, that is actually geosmin in the air that has come up through evaporation.
Yep.
So it's obviously very, very, very tiny amount. And I don't know about you, but I love the smell of rain. But I don't like that smell in my whiskey
glass.
So
it comes from, in whiskey, it comes from bacterial contamination. But in what part? Like what part of the process?
So good
Are
question.
we talking about the grain?
It could be the grain. It could be you get a little mold, maybe you got a leak in the roof you didn't catch. So it could come in on the grain. It could be in your fermenter. You've got a little mold going,
It's not cleaned properly.
Cleaning is key. You don't want to clean so much you kill any naturally occurring terroir, naturally occurring bacteria and things going on, but you do want to clean and make sure you don't have anything that's kind of funky going on. Another one that's often from bacterial, but also is produced by yeast, is diacetyl. That's one that
I feel like that's a really common one in the judging, just because it's something that can easily occur in the fermentation that people don't realize. So I think we do see that a lot, right?
We absolutely see it a lot. And for diacetyl, think movie theater popcorn, but think you let your 2-year-old kid put the movie theater butter on it. Little much. Oh, she wants some whiskey too. Hi, Stella. So that gives us
It's not. It's buttery, but overly
buttery and unpleasant. Very, very unpleasant. And that comes. The yeast naturally produces that, and
so I'm sorry. So
it's like, oh, we're moving.
So it's stressed yeast.
Stressed yeast
and
will produce
that
it,
mean?
But even unstressed yeast naturally produces it. Different strains of yeast will produce more. So
also, just a really quick note on yeast. The way that I think about it in my non-scientific mind is yeast are like little people. Okay, we gotta get
She's a bourbon kitty.
Yeast are like people. And so when it's too cold, they end up going dormant, like hibernating. When it's too hot, they get stressed and freak out and can also die.
They're very moody.
Dead yeast, yeah.
They're very moody.
If the yeast die or they get too hot, then they're not going to be doing their job. In either story, they're not doing their job.
Right, and stressed yeast and dead yeast cells put off characters and off notes. Specifically, we're talking about diacetyl, and that one's produced naturally, but also can be done through a forced. And this is where we talked about letting things happen with time a little bit. If we're talking about cutting with proof, allowing time for those molecules to settle in. So if you've got a really hot fermentation and it's not hot enough necessarily to kill the yeast, but it's really making it do overtime. Think about giving yeast a Red Bull. Then sometimes the byproduct of the Bailey synthesis is the acetolactate, which then escapes the cell and spontaneously decarboxylates into diacetyl.
Whoa.
So, long story short, when you make things do things they don't want to, then it's like that teenager spouting the sass that turns into diacetyl.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. So geosmin, diacetyl, one other one too. that I am so grossed out by is butyric.
Butyric baby
Let's
vomit.
talk baby vomit, yeah.
Let's talk baby vomit.
It's not a good smell.
It is.
And what is that caused by?
So, bacterial is one of the most common, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're saying baby vomit. Blue cheese, you know, is found in a lot of cheeses. It's just a very unpleasant. Now, obviously, a cheese, that funk is desired. But when you go to taste your whiskey or your bourbon, you don't really want to taste or smell blue cheese in that. And again, bacterial. Or another cause of that can be from low temperature mashing. Encourages butyric acid in the mash, which then it comes over through distillation. And it's not something that really ages out very well.
Does diacetyl or geosmin?
So they don't really age either. Diacetyl in large concentration ages into funky old lunch meat, Fisher's bologna that's been, you know, in the cooler from like the lake trip a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
it's the best descriptor of it doesn't age well.
And so one thing is, Ashley and I last year, and there are a lot of the bourbon women I think that attended. We had a really good event. We actually had samples of, you know, the blue cheese, beets, so that a lot of times, and I think we were going to touch on this, memory.
So sensory memory is huge.
Yeah. So obviously the gross stuff isn't as fun to, and you're going to know and you're going to remember what that smells like. So when you smell it, though, you can correlate, oh, the geosmin, this beet smell, this is probably a geosmin issue. But then talking about the fun and, you know, awesome smells of whiskey, and this is a separate, not false course, but, you know, Ashley does a great job with, we've got samples of all the baking spices and all the great smells that you can smell in a whiskey. And as you start realizing and understanding tying those different things to the smells in a good whiskey, good and bad, that's when you're really, really able to evaluate and verbalize or take notes. Going back to the judging, you don't just smell and it's like, this is good, this is bad. And that's something I had to learn. I was like, I know that there's something wrong, but I'm not sure what it is. Now I know what it is, but because I'm not technical, I'm not necessarily like, this is how you fix it. That's where Ashley really comes into play. But the good qualities of a whiskey, so often, both of us will do tastings and people love and will, you know, migrate towards, it ends up that they love wheated whiskeys. And then some are like, I love high rye. But they're not exactly sure why. And they can't verbalize what they're tasting or what they like and what they don't like. And that's what's so cool about really getting into the evaluation. So good or bad, you're able to tie tastes into the actual
so
ingredients or whatever.
A good way, you know, you want to be able to talk about what you're tasting in your bourbon, what you're tasting, be it good, bad, or ugly. You know, a lot of times on the nose when I'm smelling and evaluating, my mom has a magnolia tree in the front yard, and we have always had horses and hay, so I like a high rye. I like that herbal notes with a very magnolia and floral nose. And I think a big reason why I like that so much is because it takes me home. I know with diacetyl, and I don't know if I've even told you this, I was at a friend's house when I was younger, and we decided we wanted some popcorn, but we wanted to put butter on it. So we just like grabbed some regular old butter out of their fridge and melted it and made it so soggy. We just like doused it, and we both ended up very sick. But that is, you know, it's a memory that I associate with that smell.
Smells tied to memories.
You know, and that also, I immediately, just with the slightest hint of that aroma, it immediately takes me there, and I know, hey, diacetyl's present here. So by associating memories with your senses, it helps you to become more well-rounded when it comes to talking about your whiskey or your bourbon.
Yep. And that's why, you know, one of the awesome things is when you start to be able to identify what you love and which bourbons or whiskeys are your favorite, you can be anywhere in the world. You get a glass of it, and it just makes you feel...
It gives you a hug and takes you home.
Yeah. So anyway, we hope that this was educational. We hope that, I'm sure you learned so much. I always am learning from Ashley. We would love to see you all in person. Next year is our 10-year anniversary at Bourbon Women. We're going to have a huge symposium in person. We'll have a lot of, we'll be able to taste and smell through
hopefully good and bad things.
Good and bad. But we can't wait to have more classes with you guys and share more education from the technical side. We're lucky and fortunate that we have Ashley and always learning. So.
And learn maybe a little bit of business too.
Maybe.
We can't just make it taste good. And
we can get into the numbers if you want to at some point.
All right.
Well, but thank you guys.
Thanks for hanging out with us, and cheers, Bourbon Women.
Cheers.